The knock on my door wasn't friendly. It was sharp, official, and came at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning. I remember wiping flour from my hands. I'd been making pancakes for my husband before work, and feeling confused about who would visit this early. When I opened the door, 2 police officers stood on my porch. Behind them, the street was quiet. My sister wasn't there, but somehow I knew this was about her. One officer, a woman with tired eyes, asked if I was Lucy Henderson. I nodded. She asked if we could come inside to talk. My stomach dropped. They sat in my living room, notebooks open, expressions neutral, but serious. The male officer spoke first. He said they'd received a report about child neglect and possible abuse. My hands went cold. He said my sister claimed I had been caring for her 2 children for years, then suddenly abandoned them without warning or support. He said she told them I refused to answer calls, wouldn't provide food or supplies I'd promised, and left her children traumatized. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an accusation. My husband Daniel stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug halfway to his lips. I could see the confusion in his face shifting into something else, something that looked like doubt. He knew I'd helped my sister. He knew I'd spent years supporting her kids. But he also knew our marriage had been strained because of it. Now, hearing police officers say words like neglect and abandonment, I watched him wonder if maybe he didn't know the whole story. That look hurt more than anything my sister had done. The female officer leaned forward. She asked why I'd stopped helping the children. Her tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't warm either. She was doing her job, collecting facts, deciding who to believe. I opened my mouth and realized I didn't know where to start. How do you explain years of sacrifice in a single sentence? How do you defend yourself against lies wrapped in half-truths? I took a breath and said the only thing that felt true. I didn't abandon anyone. I raised those kids when their mother wouldn't. As I spoke, my mind pulled me backward, not to last week or last month, but to years I'd never get back. I thought about the first time my sister, Claire, called me crying at midnight. Her voice had been small and broken. She'd said she couldn't handle being a single mom anymore. She'd said her kids, Mason and Lily, needed stability she couldn't give. She'd promised it would only be temporary. Just a few months until she got back on her feet. I believed her because she was my sister, and I thought family meant showing up. That temporary arrangement became my life. Mason was 6, and Lily was 4 when they started staying at my house more nights than theirs. At first, it was weekends. Then it was weekdays, too. Then Claire stopped picking them up altogether. She'd text me excuses. Work ran late, she was too tired, she had a migraine, she needed space. I didn't argue. I made up the guest room with bunk beds. I enrolled them in the school near my house. I became the person they called when they were scared at night. Nobody asked if I was okay with this. It just happened, one day at a time, until I couldn't remember what my life looked like before. I cooked their meals, packed their lunches, and checked their homework. I went to parent-teacher conferences while Claire posted photos on social media about self-care Sundays. I bought new shoes when theirs wore out. I paid for doctor visits when Lily got strep throat. I did it all quietly, without asking for credit, because I thought love was supposed to be unconditional. The cost crept in slowly. Daniel and I stopped going on date nights because I couldn't find a sitter. We canceled our anniversary trip to the mountains because Mason had a soccer tournament. I turned down a promotion at work because the new role required travel, and I couldn't leave the kids. Every choice felt small in the moment, but together they built a wall between my husband and me. He never said he resented the kids. He didn't have to. I felt it in the silences. My sister never said thank you. She said things like, "You're so good with them, and I don't know what I'd do without you." But those weren't gratitude. They were expectations. She called me when she needed something. Money for school supplies, a ride to the dentist, someone to watch the kids so she could go to a concert. I said yes every time. I told myself I was helping her become a better mother. I was wrong. I was teaching her she didn't have to be one. It took me 4 years to realize I wasn't helping anyone. Mason started calling me Mom by accident. Lily asked why she couldn't just live with me forever. Daniel stopped initiating conversations about our future because we didn't have one. We had Claire's chaos. One night, after another canceled plan, I sat on our back porch and cried. I didn't cry often, but that night I couldn't stop. Daniel found me there and asked a question I couldn't answer. When does this end, Lucy? I decided it had to end. Not cruelly or suddenly, but intentionally. I called Claire and asked her to meet me for coffee. I practiced what I'd say. Calm, clear, firm. When we sat down, I told her I couldn't keep raising her children. I said I loved Mason and Lily, but they needed their mother, and I needed my life back. I offered to help her create a plan, connect her with resources, and transition the kids slowly. I wasn't angry. I was tired. She smiled when I finished talking, and that smile made my skin crawl. She said, "Okay, Lucy, I understand." Just like that. No argument, no tears, no promises to do better. She sipped her coffee and changed the subject like I'd just told her I couldn't babysit on Friday. I drove home confused and uneasy. For years, she'd leaned on me like I was the only thing holding her up. Now, when I stepped back, she barely blinked. I should have known that calm meant trouble. I should have seen the retaliation coming, but I didn't. 3 days later, the police knocked on my door. Sitting across from those officers, I realized Claire hadn't come to argue because she was already planning her counterattack. While I thought we were transitioning the kids responsibly, she was building a narrative where I was the villain. She told people I'd taken her children, controlled her life, and then discarded them when they became inconvenient. None of it was true, but it sounded believable. It sounded like something a selfish aunt might do, and she knew exactly who to call to make it hurt. I stood up slowly and walked to the kitchen drawer where I kept paperwork. My hands shook as I pulled out a thick folder I'd maintained for years without knowing why. Inside were receipts for every school supply, medical bill, and grocery trip. There were text messages I'd screenshotted where Claire asked me to keep the kids just one more week. There were emails from teachers addressing me as Mason and Lily's guardian. There were calendars showing years of pickups, drop-offs, and events she never attended. I handed the folder to the officers without a word. The female officer flipped through the pages slowly. Her expression didn't change, but her questions did. She asked how long I'd been the primary caregiver. She asked if Claire provided financial support. She asked if there was a formal custody arrangement. I answered honestly, 4 years, rarely, and no. She glanced at her partner, and something unspoken passed between them. The tone in the room shifted. I was no longer the suspect. I was a witness to something bigger. They called Child Protective Services. A caseworker named Angela arrived within an hour, reviewed the same documents, and asked to speak with me privately. She explained that if what I was saying was true, and the evidence suggested it was, then Claire had been neglecting her children for years while I provided unpaid, unrecognized care. Angela said the state needed to investigate whether the children were safe in Claire's home now that I'd stepped back. I felt relief and guilt collide in my chest. Daniel finally spoke. He apologized for doubting me, his voice rough with emotion. He said he'd watched me disappear into this role and hadn't known how to pull me back. He admitted he'd resented the kids, resented Claire, and resented me for choosing them over us. But seeing the police in our home, hearing the accusations, made him realize what I'd been carrying alone. He reached for my hand and I let him hold it. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. Over the next week, Claire's story started falling apart. Angela interviewed Mason and Lily separately. They told her they loved their mom, but felt safer at my house. They said Claire sometimes forgot to buy groceries or pick them up from school. They said they didn't understand why they couldn't stay with me anymore. Other people came forward too. Teachers who'd only ever seen me at meetings, neighbors who'd watched Claire drop the kids off and disappear for days. The truth was loud when people finally listened. A formal report was filed, but it wasn't about me. It was about Claire's pattern of neglect, her failure to provide adequate care, and her attempt to weaponize the system against someone who'd been protecting her children. The caseworker recommended supervised visitation and parenting classes. Claire would have to prove she could be a mother before the state trusted her alone with Mason and Lily. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad for the kids caught in the middle of their mother's inability to grow up. Claire lost things she'd taken for granted. She couldn't call me anymore and expect me to fix her problems. She couldn't use her kids as bargaining chips or play the victim while I played the hero. People who'd once felt sorry for her started asking uncomfortable questions. Family members who judged me for enabling her suddenly went quiet. The narrative she'd controlled for years slipped through her fingers, and she had no one to blame but herself. I received calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. They wanted to know my side, to apologize, to explain they didn't know it was that bad. I listened politely, but didn't need their validation. Some people see the truth only when it's undeniable, and by then, it doesn't matter. I'd learned to stop waiting for people to believe me and started trusting myself instead. Their apologies felt hollow, but I accepted them with grace and moved on. Claire called me once. I saw her name on my screen and stared at it for 3 rings before letting it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. She tried again the next day, and again I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. She'd made her choice when she called the police instead of having an honest conversation. She'd burned a bridge I'd spent years maintaining, and I wasn't going to rebuild it. Some relationships end not with explosions but with silence. Angela helped me complete the final paperwork that formally released me from any caregiving responsibilities. I signed documents stating I was no longer acting as a guardian or provider for Mason and Lily. It felt strange, like closing a chapter I'd never intended to write, but it also felt necessary. I needed legal protection from any future accusations. I needed proof that I'd done everything correctly, even when it was hard. I needed to be free to build my own life again. The house felt different after everything settled. It was quieter, calmer, like we'd finally exhaled after holding our breath for years. Daniel and I started talking about the future again. Real plans, not fantasies, interrupted by emergencies. We booked the trip we'd canceled 4 years ago. We went to dinner without checking our phones every 5 minutes. We remembered what it felt like to be partners instead of roommates managing someone else's crisis. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it was ours again. I heard through family that Claire still blames me. She tells people I abandoned her when she needed me most, that I turned her children against her, that I'm the reason her life fell apart. I don't correct the story anymore. People who know me understand the truth. People who don't aren't my responsibility. Claire never contacts me again, and I never reach out to her. For the first time in years, I wake up without dread. I make choices based on what I want, not what someone else needs. I am finally completely free.